salmon that swim upstream and birds that fly in flocks and little kids that instinctually know how to put their fingers in their nose when they're in second grade. All these things are knowledge, and knowledge is power. Hi, I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to God Search. God Search. Well, it's not just that you're going to search for God and all of a sudden you're going to sprout halos out of your head and you're going to float around. However, a God Search. By the way, this is season 2. Thank you for following season 1. We're going to get a little deeper on season 2, even a little spooky at times. It's not that your God search is about floating away and turning yourself into some kind of angelic being. It is about power. Power. And it is also about what is the basis of power, which is knowledge. In a God search, in fact, in the design of how reality works, if you don't mind me using that word design, because it implies some old man up in heaven, telling you what to do and thinking everything out in advance and all sorts of authoritarian problems, which we've already dealt with. Knowledge is everything. Everything that exists has a knowledge to it. It has a structure to the knowledge. It has a structure to the structure. And all of it, for lack of a better term, is alive. It's vibrating. It's all of these funny little new age words that people use to describe something that they really can't know completely. They are locked in a little cognitive jail, and we can only see it somewhat. But it is all some kind of intelligence that is kind of encoded in stuff. Now, we talked about that at the very beginning. Truth is not just propositional truth. The sky is blue, as opposed to the sky is cerise. That's a great word. No, it's also substantial truth. Everything that is in existence, everything you will understand, everything that you are, is in some fashion intelligence in form. You might call it information. What makes it different from knowledge is that knowledge propagates, knowledge expands, knowledge draws upon intelligence, thickens itself, and as it takes a more concrete, knowable, particular form, it becomes what is for us information. So when we eat a tomato, we're eating knowledge, we're assimilating knowledge. It's interesting that the words that are used for thinking and digesting is oftentimes the same. We will ingest knowledge. We ingest food. Okay. We will chew things over when we think about it. We will, if we get carried away and obsessive compulsive, we will ruminate like a cow with an extra pocket in its stomach, churning and churning and churning and chewing its cud. We will assimilate knowledge. We will synthesize it, catabolize it, metabolize it, and synthesize knowledge. Knowledge is food. And in fact, the neural ganglion patterns for in the stomach are astonishingly like that in the brain. And I, for one, believe that all of our knowledge structure are all evolutionary patterns that developed from our digestive system. I don't think that these are happenstance. I think we simply digest more and more rarefied information, more subtle information than the grosser plants and other animals and other stuff that are part of our food. Now, this brings us back to what we talked about in the last podcast. Minimally, and I'm saying minimally because it's far more advanced and far more subtle than that. Minimally, it is very, very productive on a God search to view yourself as having two bodies that are part of your physical body. The physical body is that which you know about yourself most intimately. You wake up every morning, you gotta shit, shower, and shave, as we say in my neighborhood, and you gotta use your body because your body is, for all intents and purposes, the most intimate aspect of you that you have control over. So there is to the physical body, it is very good to see it as having two bodies which compose your physical body, or two aspects, if you prefer, that compose your physical body, which are, as I'm calling, a light body because it has its origin in light itself, light which encodes knowledge. We know that from fiber optics. It happens all the time in the real world. And what I'm calling a material or elemental body. Let's not get confused. If you look deep enough on an elemental or material body, it is electromagnetic, and light is electromagnetic, and these categories break down because no one used these categories to invent reality. Those are categories that human beings discern, and we create our little disciplines and understandings using them. But they're convenient, so I'm just going to continue to use light body as distinguished from a material or elemental body, both of which together, minimally, there are other components, by the way, that compose what we call our physical body. Now, on your God search, if you proceed in your God search the way we discussed and remove the mind cracks and increase the unity, the truth, and the increasingly excellent way you perfect your quality of life so that it mirrors the perfection, which is how life is already designed, you will begin to notice the emergence of power. Power. Now, some religions call that God's grace. Some people call that, the Jewish people in Hebrew, we call it hashgacha. There's a hashgacha. It's, it's a really hilarious word. A hashgacha prati, or a kind of personal providence, or there is a hashgacha klali, which is a kind of a group providence, which we talked about roughly when we talked about evolution, and we talked about, um, group selection is hashgacha prati. And as you continue your God search, you're going to know that a kind of subtle power opens up. Okay. It's behind the veil of your body. If you view your elemental or material aspect of your body as a veil, all right, as a bunch of bricks, what's behind in the plumbing and the lighting begins to pick up a force. It downloads, I love that word. It downloads intelligence in the form of knowledge, and increasingly it will download knowledge in the form of information. And a lot of us would call that becoming physical, but it gets very, very confused unless you separate out the layers. As you go on your God search, you will find that you will become increasingly aware of the field or the consciousness or the aspect of your light body behind you. And you will notice that it gets charged. It gets charged with force, it gets charged with energy, it gets charged with some kind of vibration, and that is palpable. Now, as in nature, you'll notice, in earthly nature, you'll notice that animals tend to have an instinctive sense of who has more dominance and who has less dominance, and this is across the board. And that is because there is this second body that is sending out a signal, let's call it a light signal, to the other animals and putting a field around them, and they can sense it. The animals can sense the power of the other person. In animals, earthly animals that are not as intelligent as human beings in terms of their material science, we are very, very advanced in terms of our material, our mental ego power. For those animals, the elemental body and the light body are very fused. So what happens is as they grow and experience life on Earth and test their knowledge, and as knowledge invests itself in them physically, it produces superior physical attributes, all of which would, of course, be a wonderful thing if they go back and reproduce with other animals. You get more vibrant and healthy life forms. In the human being, however, the power dynamics are much more subtle. And this is where all of us get screwed up in life. So pay close attention. Please pay close attention. What happens with the human being is because we are not at this stage in our evolution as physically focused. It is the light body that becomes the major source of the dynamism and the evolutionary thrust to who we are. It is the knowledge underneath the material veil that gets most charged. That's why you can walk into a room, if you pay close attention on your God search, you can walk into a room, and even if it's a kind of a short, slender, skinny girl or guy or both, if their light body is vibrating with tremendous sense of knowledge and tremendous wideness of scope, wideness of field, meaning they're drawing into themselves and a tissue of environment, of creation, instantiated, that's a great word, in them, you can sense enormous power, and they can be physically very, very feeble, docile, even sick, like a Stephen Hawking, may he rest in peace. So the power dynamics these days is very, very much predicated upon an invisible body. There are, of course, people who are very identified with immaterial and their elemental body. And for them, their power is much more physically present, and you can sense it through that aspect of that body. And there are people who are very good at having both. Some people can do both. But the important thing is to separate very clearly these two orders of power. Now, the invisible kind of light body is the one that is very, very confusing because it has its own development of thought. It has its own development of being able to draw into itself the knowledge of existence in which we move. And that allows it to become a real subconscious aspect of who we are. It's the kind of stuff that dreams come from. It's kind of stuff where we can feel a download of a revelation, what these days people like to call channeling. It draws on the unknown. It draws on the darker aspects of the invisible and the mysterious darkness. Isn't it interesting how human beings and who developed from more primitive primates, that these developed from nocturnal animals after the dinosaurs were iced. You know, it's really interesting how that it is the nocturnal animals, the ones that were open to the mystery and the darkness and that which was not seen, beyond, who inherited the throne of intelligence on the planet. It's a very, very interesting thing. Now, as human beings developed, as we've spoken about before, that light body became specified and began to form a more of a dominant mental pattern. That mental pattern took dominion over the material aspects and the elemental aspects of earthly nature. And human beings learned technology. We learned how to alter the structure of the earth and the structure of nature and break it apart and reassemble it. And we created our own contribution to the design of this world and it became very, very complex because we were so able to reconstruct it according to our desires. It didn't always align to what would be the ideal thing for mere earthly nature alone. And this is how you got problems with technology and cars that belch out carbon monoxide and all these things that we're suffering from these days. Our ability to alter earthly nature added to our subconscious minds. So we had two aspects. We had knowledge of creation, the universe, God. These are all scale distinctions. And that came down us, that was down to us, which is subconscious. It is intelligence formed as knowledge, which becomes information. And then we add to that our own experience as we gain ascendancy of our mind over earthly nature and the material and elemental body, which we commonly call our planet. A material and elemental body, which we call our planet. So what happens is we're building up tremendous amount of knowledge in the light body of who we are. Tremendous amount of knowledge. And that knowledge that we're building up in that light body generates power. And that power is palpable and visible. It's kind of like when you are, you can put a tuning fork near a piano. And if you hit the piano key for a certain string, that string will vibrate with the same frequency as the tuning fork. Actually, I have it in reverse. You hit the tuning fork, and the tuning fork vibrates, and the string on the piano that corresponds to the tuning fork will vibrate. It can do it in reverse. That's where I got confused. I'm old. Forgive me. Um, what happens is the piano string doesn't need to be touched by your finger, and it vibrates the same. That is what happens to power. Now, that power that's stored in your light body, which is vibrating, can imprint in a very similar way on other people. It goes on all the time. It's an imprinting process where that power that's in your light body can impress itself upon you from another person. This is how birds flock. This is how salmon go upstream. This is how kids learn things, even though they're not in school learning it, they just pick it up from the air. It's what we like to call as biologists, we like to call it instinct, but it's a very, very magnificent spiritual ability where we are encoding intelligence in the form of a very subtle field which is creating knowledge and ultimately a more denser, more structured field, which has a form, so I'm calling it information. Great pun. Now, that power that is in the subtle body, that is the power that people feel when they're in the room with a power broker, whether that person has muscles or not. That is the field that teachers, if they are very powerful, natural teachers, will impress upon their students. That is the power that parents have over their children, much more than threatening to take their allowance away. This is the power that bosses who are excellent bosses, this is, or such as statesmen and true political figures, all right, not rabble, but true political figures that have an enormous sense of a field where they are taking in knowledge of existence and creation, can transmit this, and other people will feel it like their piano strings being hit by a tuning fork, and they will pick it up, and that transmits knowledge. We even know biochemically that there are hormones and secretions that take place. Amygdala in the brain secretes, substances from these things, and that we can actually pick up images from that information and that it's transmitted chemically. This is a unified world. And as you are on your God search, you are going to increasingly be stunned by the intricacy of the unity of this world. You might be tempted to call it one, but that's a very problematic word. So we're not going to go there yet. But we can call it a unity. By the way, this power that is in the subtle body of the human being, the light body, is also what is responsible for demagoguery, where you get a Stalin, where you get a Hitler, where you get anyone who abuses power and has people who are following them. It is the source of cultism, Jonestown, right? It is the source of ideally true religious leadership, a profound uh, Hasidic rabbi with tremendous touching on the actual celestial Torah, the laws that are built into the design of creation. It is what priests in different religions, including the Catholic religion, are ideally supposed to exemplify. They tend to curtail, in order to develop this, they tend to curtail the elemental or material aspects, largely sexual and material, and that detours their focus so that they can open up more of the light body, which is downloading knowledge and intelligence into them so they can be an altar. So when you're receiving communion, for example, the priest ideally has cultured a power within the priest that can be transmitted at the exact same time as the mystery of the host. This is the same thing in certain Hindu branched religions, which are associated with what's called darshan, where the very presence of the guru transmits a knowledge to the person who is on the receiving end. And by the way, it is quite vice versa because the devotees do infuse their love into the light body of the guru, and they amplify that as well. And this is also the power that can be abused at times by people in power, and it can be commingled with inappropriate sexual behavior. The light body is the source of an invisible power. We call it spiritual. There are many, many terms for it, but it is a very real thing. The most critical issue when you're dealing with power, when you're on your God search, is to always be aware of the sacredness, not the absoluteness, because, it gets tricky. We've talked about that. The sacredness of the individual. Every single individual, including children, have a sacredness to who they are. Individuality itself is the individuation of the notion of a unity, which is a wholeness, a kind of oneness. Every individual is a unique expression of that and is deserving of respect and is deserving of not being violated by others. Now, violations are going to take place. They happen all the time in nature, and they're part of the sharing of power. Parents don't get their children's permission for everything that they communicate to children. Children just get it and they soak it up. And sometimes they soak up knowledge that is not complete, and they need to go to a therapist later on in order to undo what they learned. There is, unfortunately, in nature, a lot of things that can go wrong. But what is critical from the standpoint of human beings, because we do have this amazing power of material intellect, is that we maintain proper safeguards around our egos and our use of our individual power. This, by the way, is the purpose of old time religion. This is, as we talked about, where these ancient laws in the Bible that give us so many headaches these days because they're not in the proper spiritual context of what we're living in. That's where these laws came in that told us don't steal, don't commit adultery. They were there to put nice, healthy boundaries in place so that we don't misuse the immense spiritual power that we can receive directly from all of existence as being human beings, and we don't misuse that in a way that undermines other people, which only undermines ourselves because we are part of a group and a species. Lastly, these spiritual aspects of this knowledge in the light body, it's not only shared between a tuning fork and a piano string, or between a teacher and a student, and a devotee and the guru, and a priest and a parishioner. It's not just that. This is something that is shared between two people, three people, four people, any number of people. It creates a spiritual field. It is the correspondence in material form of what Carl Jung termed a collective consciousness. It is a kind of invisible nature to the human being that can be shared. You might call it, if you want to push it a little bit, we got to be careful here. You might call it a species consciousness. And also within that subtle body, if you are not disconnected, in what's in our original gift, what some people call the original sin, if you're not disconnected, connected to you will also be the living nature of the planet, the living nature of animals and vegetables and all sorts of rocks, and everything will somehow be imprinted in your light body, as well as some of the individual human learnings that you've gotten through the exploration of human faculties like technology. And that will be there too. So what gets built up is that kind of group consciousness, which is necessary for a nation, necessary for, hey, it's necessary for a PTA meeting, it's necessary for the Girl Scouts, or, it's necessary for a church or a synagogue, or an ashram or a mosque. That kind of group communion, a communion body, is part of the design of who we are, and it's what makes us solid. Solid. And in extension, it would include every single human being on the entire planet, which if you're Christian, you will know that by the idea of the body of Christ, or you might know it as the original Adam in Hebrew, which is not an individual boy's name alone. It means humankind. The idea is that we imprint upon each other and we share that subtle body all the time, even if we're not sharing our physical bodies by mating. So do be aware that this is also the thing that allows for a separation between what is our sex and what might be our gender, because these are all technological issues. As we learn and experiment, we can imprint in our subconscious minds and our light bodies. We can have variations that test the boundaries of nature. This is the normal freedom that goes with being a human being. Also, what happens, and it is very much of a difficulty in many interpersonal relations these days that are less biologically structured and more structured by the dynamics of, of the subtle power that's in the light body, is that there can be confusions. Your light body can be saying immense, enormous power, but your behavior could be afraid of fear. Your actual, body could be repressed. You could be holding back the natural power that is supposed to be transmitted through your hormones and the smell of estrogen and testosterone, which as animals we're privy to. I have found that in counseling people, oftentimes there is a disjunction between the power that's in them on their light body, as expressed through their mental field, and what their bodies are actually saying. Their bodies oftentimes say that they're not powerful because there are fears and habits of fears that are built into us that communicate different signals than what the light body is doing. Conversely, I've known many, many people who are so powerful in their elemental bodies, and they do not communicate power mentally. And these are people who often do not achieve their full potential because they are so locked in the material and the elemental aspects that they can't open their field up. And opening that field up so that they can gain a much wider spiritual, um, you know, play where they can open up to the cosmos, to open up to what actually can enter into us, is an art when you're helping these people. Every single person has this array differently, and it has to be approached differently. And there are many, many confusions of power, many, many confusions of identity, especially, as we said, in a democratic era where identity and rights are very intermingled and haven't been properly sorted out. Please go to yourgodsearch.com. Please enter into this conversation. We need to build up a spiritual knowledge that's real and cogent and tested, not just a lot of religious propaganda or political propaganda. These questions that we are having these days in our society require real knowledge. They require knowledge from a God search. And I encourage every single person out there to get on your God search. Share your knowledge, share your experience. They are all anecdotal, but you put them together, you put enough people with enough anecdotes together, you can get a general understanding of what's going on. And down the road, you can double blind test it and apply the scientific method, systematize it, and actually develop what is necessary for human beings to be happy and expansive and continue a society that isn't self-destructive. What's needed is that we have to be organized according to a spiritual science. That, by the way, is what I like about the Bible because that's what it is. But it's a little outdated and it's hidden behind all sorts of cultural stuff from a few thousand years ago, so you can't see it. But life is a spiritual science from the Latin sciens, knowledge. You want power? Open up to the unity, the truth, and the causality, which is the nature of what we might call by the word God. It is good, hence the word God, right? Open up to that and download it and bring it into your life. The intelligence that surrounds us, the knowledge that it becomes through our discernment of it, and the information, which is like the material forms that we can pop a grape in our mouth and squash it. And isn't that information incredible? It says so much. Enjoy it. This is the magnificence of being human. We went through season one where we had some basic, it was a lot of kvetching about all sorts of things that is bad with religion and bad teaching. In season two, we're going to go deeper into the human subtleties of experience. And the most subtle thing is being aware. Again, following on the heels of the last podcast, that there's more than one body to your body. Okay. You have to learn how to operate it. All right. If you want to play golf, you better take a few lessons. This is Michael Shevack for God Search. Uncover God, recover God if you have lost it because you've been taught something, and discover the absolutely amazing experience that we call God. I've never met God. I don't even know if God exists, but I can tell you the experience that has been called God by many, many different religions and cultures in different forms in different ways, for what their needs were and adapted according to that particular niche. That experience is real. I invite you to have it for yourself. Every Wednesday, join me about 5:45 Eastern Standard Time. Bye-bye, and thank you as always. God bless. Bye-bye.